I'd like to call the scheduled planning meeting, or meeting of the planning commission for October 8th to order. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And that's me tonight, so please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. All right, thank you. So this brings us to our public comments section of the meeting. This gives the public a chance to address any issues that are not on tonight's agenda. Anybody have any requests to speak? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on. We will go to the consent calendar.
Motion to accept the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Can we go ahead and vote? And the motion carries. Thank you. And we will now open our public hearing with our first public hearing item.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This evening, our first public hearing is site development permit for a dance training facility within an existing building on Barrett C. Circle. And Jennifer Mansour has a staff report.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. This item is a site development permit for Extreme Dance, a dance training facility proposed to be located in an existing freestanding building on Barrett C. Circle. Extreme Dance currently operates out of the Foothill Business Park, which is located on Rancho Parkway South in the city. The business provides dance training for various dance styles for both recreational students and members of their 16 dance. As you may recall, in March of this year, the Planning Commission approved this business for a location in the Rancho Business Center. The project was opposed by the Rancho Business Center Association and some of the building owners and tenants. However, the owner of Extreme Dance decided not to move forward with that location. Now the owner has found a new location, which is a freestanding building that does not share any parking or access. A significant amount of the new building space will be used for storage, staff offices, a homework room, a larger waiting area, and a locker room. And the business is planning only a minimal expansion of the number of students. The site is zoned light industrial in our Pacific Commerce Center planned community, and the dance use facility is considered an indoor athletic facility by the code. The city's code does not have a parking standard for an indoor athletic facility, therefore the applicant submitted a parking study, which concluded that the 35 parking stalls at the new site would accommodate the proposed use with up to 74 students, instructors, and employees on site at any given time, which was included as a condition of approval in your resolution. The proposed dance training facility is located in an area with a mix of industrial businesses and other athletic training facilities. The proposed facility will be conducted completely within the interior of the building, and the noise generated within the facility will not be heard by the surrounding businesses. Furthermore, the peak hours of the business occur at 6 p.m. when most of the neighboring businesses are closed. Additionally, the pro site can be accessed from 2 different driveways, which will facilitate site circulation. Accordingly, the proposed dance training facility is in compliance with the city zoning code and, as conditioned, will be compatible with the surrounding uses. Staff is recommending the Planning Commission approve the site development permit and adopt the corresponding resolution. The applicant is in the audience tonight, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We'll start by asking if anybody has questions for Jennifer or the rest of the staff. All right. Well, then I guess we will move to officially opening the public hearing on this item, and we'll call our first public speaker. Is the applicant first?
Yes.
Okay.
Heather Van Hule.
If you could, please just state your name and city of residence for the record.
Sure. I'm Heather Van Holy, or Hule, whatever works. Our business has been in Lake Forest for 10 years now. We're going on our 15th season and 10 year of actually being in Lake Forest. That's where we opened our business. she pretty much said everything that I was going to say. This building is just a much better opportunity for us. We are looking to have a business here in Lake Forest permanently. I plan on eventually buying a building and this is my lifelong business. So this is why we kind of chose to go somewhere else. We felt that it was a better situation for us to find something that would be a long-term home, something that would provide us with a little bit more growth, and certainly having a freestanding building, a little bit more parking, easier traffic flow, everything that the previous neighbors had kind of brought up as concern, I feel wouldn't even be an issue in this new situation. So we felt that it would be a much better option for us to have a long-term home with less possible issues ever coming up. It is bigger and allows us a little bit more room for growth as well, to be able to have this business and not grow out of the building.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay.
I have a comment. I just have a comment. I want to thank you that you decided to stay in Lake Forest, and I would agree with what you said. I think this is a better location, and the plan that you submitted here tonight is superior, in my opinion, to what was submitted, and we did approve before.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers? Okay. No other on this issue? Okay, thank you. All right, then I will bring it back up here, and we'll start discussion.
To me, this is a much better situation than she had before. Much better. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm prepared to close the public hearing and make a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Okay. I don't think we likely need a whole lot of discussion, although I do want to add very quickly while I have a chance, since you guys have kind of cut off the discussion on me. Thought I was in charge.
That was your discussion?
No. Believe me, that's not it. No, I agree. This is, my daughter's ice skating is just up around the corner. There's basketball facilities just around the corner. I think there's a baseball place, pitching and hitting as well. So, there's a reason we don't have a room full of neighbors telling me that I'm evil for saying yes. And so it's kind of a no-brainer for me. So, thank you. And all right, well, congratulations, and thank you again for staying in Lake Forest. We're glad to have you. So, all right, this moves us to our next agenda item.
Our next agenda item is a zoning code amendment that deals with the regulation of massage establishments in the city of Lake Forest. And Jennifer Mansour also has the report on this item this evening.
This item is a city-initiated code amendment related to massage establishments. I'm going to hopefully give you a quick history of the massage regulations in our city. Since 1996, the city has regulated massage establishments under Chapter 5.07 of our code. Originally, the regulations included the requirement for a city license for each massage establishment, licenses for massage each with operational standards. In 2007, the Orange County Sheriff's Department conducted operations to expose a number of criminal violations occurring at massage establishments located in Lake Forest. In some instances, the city's efforts to remove these illicit uses required an extensive and coordinated effort by the Sheriff's Department, city staff, and legal counsel. Due to these issues, the City Council directed staff to work toward a solution that would broaden the city's ability to regulate these businesses. In 2008, the City Council adopted an ordinance establishing zoning restrictions on all massage establishments. The regulations included a requirement for a use permit for all existing establishments and limited new establishments to commercial and urban activity zoning areas with the approval of a use permit. Approximately a year later, the California governor signed Senate Bill 731, also known as the Massage Therapy Act. Under this law, cities were not allowed to require any land use regulations or licensing that was not specifically related to health and safety issues. Furthermore, the state created the California Massage Therapy Council to certify all massage therapists and prohibited cities from licensing these therapists. Due to this law, the city essentially stopped regulating massage establishments and massage therapists. Subsequent to this Senate bill, the League of California Cities and a coalition of cities proposed new legislation that would return local control to cities. Assembly Bill 1147 was signed into law in 2014. The bill allowed cities to once again regulate massage establishments with the exception of the licenses for the individual massage therapists, which will continue to be a function of the California Massage Therapy Council. The proposed ordinance before you tonight will modify the city's code to regulate massage establishments in generally the same manner that was previously approved by the City Council in 2008. Generally, the regulations would limit new establishments to commercial and urban activity zoning districts with the approval of a use permit, require an annual massage establishment license, and reinstate the operational regulations. Since 2009, when the state limited the city's local control of these establishments, the number of massage establishments in the city has doubled, and there are currently 37 known establishments in our city. Under the proposed ordinance, these existing establishments would not require a use permit and would be considered legal nonconforming. This means these businesses can stay in the same location and can be sold. As long as the tenant space is not vacant for more than a year, the business does not move locations, and the business does not expand, no use permit would be required for these existing businesses. However, under the proposed ordinance, these existing establishments would require the annual massage establishment licenses by July of next year and would be subject to the operational requirements. All of the known existing establishments in the city were sent a notice of this public hearing. The reinstatement of the massage establishment license and zoning restrictions is intended to discourage massage establishments that may be planning to conduct illicit activity. The new requirements will facilitate the city's ability to monitor these businesses with an annual review and inspection of each establishment. Furthermore, the requirements will provide the city with a mechanism to remove any establishment with illicit activities through revocation of either the use permit, the massage establishment license, or both. Lastly, the use permit requirement is consistent with the regulations in other nearby cities, which will ensure that the city does not become a preferred location for illicit establishments because our regulations are perceived to be less stringent. Accordingly, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council adopt this code amendment. That concludes my presentation, and if you have any questions about the zoning code amendment, I would be happy to answer them. We also have Carlo Tomaino from the City Manager's Office here tonight if you have any questions about the state legislation. Thank you.
Thank you again, Jennifer. Does anybody have questions for staff?
Quick one. Jennifer, this new license that the old businesses are required to purchase, if you will, how much will it cost?
So we're working on the fee that will go to the City Council, but it's going to be, currently we have it at about $155 a year.
Would that be in line with what other cities charge for the same?
Well, when we originally had this license, I believe it was about $300 or $400 because we did it all through the Sheriff's Department, through the Santa Ana office. So it's cheaper than it was back then. I'm not sure. We didn't do a study of the fees for other cities. But the way that we determine a fee is based on the time spent by the people that will be processing it. And when we take this fee resolution to City Council, it'll have basically the calculation of the time spent by each person and how much that costs the person to, you know, their fully burdened salary rate.
Anyone else have questions for staff? Did we have any requests to speak? Oh, okay. So go ahead and hand your card over here. They'll hand it down. And then as you come up, I'll just let you know. Go ahead and over here.
I didn't fill it out yet. I wasn't sure I was missing it just now.
Okay, so yeah, so go ahead and I'll have you fill it out afterwards and hand it to her before you leave, please.
No problem.
And just please state your name and city of residence for the record. And are we using the lights? Okay, so I don't know if you've spoken here.
I haven't spoken here before. But,
Okay, so
it was actually for more of a clarification, actually. So my name is Eric Hua, and I am a resident of San Clemente.
Okay.
I have a business here. I'm a national franchise company, which is called Massage Envy, on El Toro, and I also own one in Mission Viejo, two in Mission Viejo. I'm sorry. So the questions I had were, as I read through the things, we had certain exemptions, and I did some studies back before I opened my massage places. So I opened in 2008, 2009, and 2011 here in Lake Forest. Totally 100% in support of getting rid of illicit places, because I think it, of course, detracts from our industry, makes things more difficult. That being said, before I came into the city, I also did studies of what was going on in the cities, and I think like one of the big problems I think was Lake Forest Body Center, not the current one on El Toro, but the other one. And one of the things I recall was they actually operated underneath a chiropractor as well. They had a chiropractor as well, but the exemptions that you have here would exempt any person having those associations. So, as someone who would be involved or having, if this is put on me as a reputable business, I would want to make sure that any unreputable business would have to be followed as well. So the exemptions I would like to see removed would be those things that so that they can sneak underneath the radar. So those people are chiropractors. I've also, as a legitimate business, I've also had to deal with competition. While I follow all these really tough, stringent rules, codes, and things like that, they try to people will find clauses. So exemptions like, well, we do massage, full body massage, and then they'll say, well, we only do foot massage. Well, in actuality, they're actually doing full massage, but then they're not actually listed on that as well. So I would want to see some sort of clarification that would be full encompassing, that there are no loopholes that they can. So I did that, so I wanted to make sure that was also implemented. And then the use permit, one of the things, because I'm looking, my relationship with my franchise can span, I've got 10-year leases with my current landlord, which will go 10, 20, potentially 30 years. So I'm looking a little further down the line here. But also, as I think about construction, like if I am forced to move because my building's getting a little bit older, and if they want to do a remodel, which they've mentioned, or if they want to do a complete tear down, what happens to me as an existing business who now is forced to move to a different place by no change of my own? Am I going to be now potentially not able to open again, or it's just a matter of reapplying and moving my license?
Well, as a body up here, we can't actually directly address your questions. At least I don't think we can. Am I correct in my understanding of that?
Chairman Brower, you may ask staff questions.
Okay,
So
because I think Jennifer can answer some of those questions. I
We
want to make
won't
sure that she's
respond
allowed
directly
to.
to the speaker,
Okay.
but if you also would like some answers, please ask staff to respond to a particular
Absolutely. I
question.
just want to make sure I wasn't overstepping in asking Jennifer to answer what she could, because I don't know the answers.
Regarding if you had to move to a new location, if you had to move to a new location, you would be required to get a use permit and to comply with all the zoning restrictions. However, if it was your building was just being remodeled and you basically couldn't operate and it was less than a year, you would maintain your grandfathered non-conforming status. So as long as it wasn't for more than a year, you could go back into the same location without having to get a use permit. We do have exemptions for it's not only chiropractors, but it's physicians, surgeons, chiropractors, acupuncturists, or osteopaths that are duly licensed, and those individuals do not need to have a massage license because they're licensed through a medical board. However, we do say that if a massage therapist is getting a medical massage, then they do not have to have the use permit. However, we have in here, if the professional facility is used for the purposes of non-medical massage, the facility itself must be licensed as a massage establishment. So the clarification would be whether or not someone could just go in there and get a massage, or if they need to see the chiropractor who then prescribes a massage, if that made sense. So that's how it's currently written, and that's how it was written. It's always been written.
Right. So I also did a franchise called The Joint, which also is in Lake Forest as well, and some of the chiropractors will operate with massage therapists as contractors, and I recall that there was a chiropractor at Lake Forest Body Center as well, and so my fear is that they would ride right underneath this legislation, or the change, I should say, that if they, even though they are licensed, that these massage therapists would be therefore exempt because they were working underneath them, even though they would just be exempt. As written.
Maybe I could ask a further question of Jennifer. So if a chiropractor has a therapist, and that therapist is offering non-medical massages, would it be the chiropractor or the medical doctor or whomever it is that has this therapist, would their license be in jeopardy based on non-compliance with?
Well, technically, they wouldn't have a city massage establishment license, so there would be nothing to revoke. The code enforcement would have to go out and tell them they need to have a massage establishment license and a use permit. So it would be a code enforcement issue.
If
Like their medical license?
correct.
I have no idea. I'm not sure how you would go about revoking or,
Yeah, we don't have that power.
yeah,
Well,
the
but
state
I
license.
would
That's the
direct
short
the
answer.
question to our
Maybe hung down.
assistant city attorney.
Good evening, planning
Hello.
commissioners. Regarding specific medical licenses, I really don't know. I suppose that, if they're in violation of the municipal code, that we could somehow complain to whatever board, they have to be accountable to, but I'm not sure what exactly would happen with that very specific license. But Jennifer.
But that would be a form of maybe regulation that might help one of our businessmen here that's suggesting that perhaps if there's people going underneath the radar, there's other avenues that we can look at to help keep them honest.
That's correct, Vice Chair. I'm assuming that generally if there's a violation of the municipal code, there's ways to lodge complaints. There's various processes. They may be administrative or maybe more stringent, I'm not sure, but at least in the body center litigation, we did, are heavily litigated against them and won those suits. And so in that way, there was a way to keep that, business accountable.
Are there, I lost my question, but are there, I'll get it, sorry, lost my question totally.
Can I jump in and ask?
Yes,
what you think?
exactly.
Okay. It may even be the same one, you never know.
Yeah.
Well, first I will say thank you to you. I appreciate your comments, as actually we appreciate all public comments. And you raised some key issues that maybe we hadn't thought of, so I do appreciate that. So my question is, if I'm a chiropractor, regardless of whether or not I have massage on staff, and I want to open a chiropractic office, do I get a CUP or do I not need one?
I believe medical offices are allowed in, they have some parking requirements, but they're permitted uses in a lot of the zoning districts, including commercial office and,
So for the most part, it's just an administrative
yeah,
approval. It's not
even administrative, it's the permitted use, they can go in without any.
Okay, so they just open up shop,
Land use regulations.
hang a shingle. just
they
like
meet parking,
Like I
yes.
did as an attorney, I leased a space in a building and hung my shingle. And
Exactly, it's
done.
like an office.
Okay,
I remember the question, do you mind?
absolutely.
Sorry. So why are we not putting a chiropractor with a therapist through this same process that,
We are using the same code that we did in 2009, but there's no reason why we couldn't change that.
and did you research that other cities are lenient like we are, or?
Most of our research of other cities had to do with the use permit requirement and whether or not they had a massage establishment license, but we didn't look into all of their criteria.
So possibly as a part of our maybe accepting this document as you presented it, could be that you look into that before it goes to city council?
Yes.
Would that be helpful?
Yes, I mean,
Good.
in the, I guess as a business owner, we operate in a very interesting business, and every business owner who wants to work within the law always wants to do what's best for the public and whatnot, public safety and whatnot. But in the end, we are we are held to a standard that we're responsible for the actions of our employees, right? The challenge that we have is that my greatest fear is that I have somebody, a client, who solicits something, and then in a moment of weakness or something, that something happens, right? That's my biggest fear. Can I control it? I have an extremely zero tolerance policy that if I even get the whiff of it, we're done, right? By having something like this, the fear that I have is that I'm now held to account by a permit that my fear, and I'm not trying to stop anything because obviously I want to be safe, but I also fear that if something is done, does this give City Hall the ability to just shut me down overnight because I was accused of something, or because something happened, or a person was upset that we canceled their membership, and then they say something about our business, and now I'm sitting here going, my license was revoked over what? So at what point what I'd like to really know is, at what point could this license be pulled from me for something that I had maybe perhaps even no knowledge of?
Well, I will say, without having a specific answer, because I don't know the detail of that. Gail may know the steps, but I know that you're required by law to have due process before we take away your license. So we
Right.
That is correct. If I could say, the process would be to revoke the CUP. So if a competitor, a neighbor, or someone alleged that something had occurred or insinuated or something else, that's not the basis to revoke a CUP. We would have to establish the facts on which the CUP would be revoked. So that's the protection you have for, just a charge being filed. We can't use that to revoke a CUP.
Okay. Right. So again, I'm all for creating a better, safer city, and obviously making it more difficult for people in the city is great for us. But again, what I'd like to make sure that you guys understand is that if we have to hold our head up high and be held to the standards, I want all loopholes cleaned up for the people.
Okay. Let me just give you, I don't want to use the word assurance, but something to go on. It's very clear if you read the ordinance that if there are any misdeeds, should we say, it focuses on the individual, not necessarily the business. So that's for you.
That was the old part.
Okay. The individual of the accused?
Well, an employee or a person in your facility, should they do something unlawful, then any action taken would be to that individual, not to the business necessarily.
Okay.
Am I correct on that? No?
I think that was the old ordinance. We're on to a new one.
Right. I mean, not necessarily would it mean a revocation. There would be an investigation, but the owner is responsible for the actions of what happens in the establishment. And so if there is illicit activity there that is proven, we could revoke the use permit and or the massage establishment license,
I would imagine,
which would affect the owner.
I would imagine it's on a case-by-case basis, though. It's,
Yeah, I mean,
if the owner could come in and show in that investigation that this was an isolated event, the employee's been terminated, it's never happened before, and we don't stand for that, they would probably keep their CUP. I mean, obviously, I'm not the one making that decision, I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
So,
Well,
but
going-
I think it allows for that investigative process to play out. So,
Going back to Jolene's question, if you look on page E of the packet, under exceptions, there's an issue about the massage therapist not having to be licensed. Paragraph 1A says massage therapists are required to be certified by CAMTC, and that's under the same paragraph that talks about physicians, surgeons, chiropractors, and all that type of thing. So,
right, well, they do need to be licensed, but we can require that they are licensed, we can't issue the licenses. I
no,
think that
that's not.
changes.
No, the state issues the license. That's not the point. But I thought the question came up earlier was that if a doctor or somebody hired some type of massage therapist that was not licensed, could they really do that? If I read page 90
That wasn't
correctly,
the
they
question.
can't do that.
My question was, if they hired somebody and that person was going under the,
Using the medical exemption to do non-medical work.
then can somebody go at the chiropractor because it's a possible misuse of a license?
Well, I think you'd be violating the Business and Professions Code.
Okay, so
Exactly.
for point of order, if I could, I'm going to try to rein it in a little bit. I do appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
I thank you. And we kind of went back into group discussion before actually bringing it back to the group, so. There was no other speakers requested? Okay, it's part of the reason that I was willing to go a little long with one speaker, because I thought that was the case, but, so I will bring it back up to us. We've already had some discussion. I'm going to start with a quick question. We can do it as part of the motion, so, but the, I do think that a possible way of, and I apologize, I'm terrible with names, but the gentleman who spoke to us, one of his issues, I would recommend that when we send this to City Council, we do it with an additional line. I'm not sure exactly where it would get plugged in. I'll leave that to our people who are much higher training in that area, but something that basically, I don't think it would be an overreach to say any code enforcement violations that arise, if they bear out, that the city be required by this ordinance to notify the appropriate licensing body. So if it's a chiropractor and it's going on under his watch, we can't necessarily slap that chiropractor, but we can make sure that the chiropractic board knows, hey, this guy is over here breaking rules. And so, whatever the appropriate language is to accomplish that, I would like to see included. I think that was a valid point raised. So,
Can I ask a question on that? If we're not requiring this chiropractor to have a licensing, then why would it be included in this new code?
well, I think under enforcement in this code, if we're saying that, hey, if you're going to do any sort of non-medical massage within the city, you have to have the CUP, because even if I'm not mistaken, I think Jennifer said, and I think I read it, right? If they're using the medical exemption, it has to be for non-medical massage. So if we find out that they're not, then their exemption would be gone. They would be required to get the CUP. And so as part of the process of going in and saying, hey, you either need to stop this or you need to get a CUP, I would like to include and we're notifying your licensing body that you've been playing dirty. So.
Okay.
Okay, if, just to clarify, so the chiropractor's exemption is if he has a therapist doing medical massage. So if an issue arises that someone in the chiropractor's office is doing non-medical massage, the city would take two actions. One, we would notify them they're technically considered a massage establishment, they need a use permit, they need the license, and we'd also notify the appropriate licensing board for whatever professional they were.
And that's all I was saying, is whatever, in addition to whatever enforcement we would normally do anyway.
And it wouldn't be limited to chiropractors. I think we look at the foot massage and all that.
Right, exactly. Whatever licensing body applies to whatever category of exemption is being used.
If I could clarify, the question about the foot massage, if you read the definition of massage, using hands to massage external portions of a body, a foot massage is a massage.
Well, and the exemption in here that perhaps he was referring to was pedicures. If you go to get a pedicure and you have, which they have are licensed by the state, they do a foot massage as part of the pedicure, and that is what is exempted from this code.
Right.
It's manicures and pedicures.
Right. And so I guess that
What's a pedicure without a massage?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that. I do not know. But I guess what I would say is in that scenario, they're doing the pedicure, they do the foot massage, they're fine because that's within the boundaries of the exemption. They start doing the legs and thighs and they want to get moving up the body, now you're in violation. You're a massage parlor, you need to, And so we would be doing our own enforcement, but also notifying whoever it is that licensed pedicures or manicures. Hey, your pedicure parlor over here is really doing massage instead. So, I think that I don't think that's inappropriate. Obviously, I have to convince at least two of you to vote with me on that. But so. Oh, sorry. Actually,
Well, to clarify, if they're just doing foot massages, they are not exempt.
okay.
Unless it's with a pedicure with the appropriate license.
Okay. So So that being said, is there any further discussion up here that anybody would like to bring?
How are you going to phrase your amendment?
I was going to lean on our legal staff and their crack training to come up with the appropriate wording, but
Yes, we can craft an amendment to the ordinance that
And-
captures.
would we then need to bring it back to us before we send it to the council, or would we still be able to send it to the council?
We'd be able to send her directly to the council.
Okay, then that's my worded amendment.
And
And I'll second your motion. How's that?
would there be consensus on asking staff to go and check what other cities are doing with regards to, what do,
The exemptions?
yeah.
If I may interject, our firm has worked on massage ordinances for other cities. I can't obviously speak for all of them, but these exemptions are actually very standard for physicians, chiropractors. But if you notice, there's several places in the proposed ordinance that talks about medical massages. So the intent is really exempting these medical massages as part of the therapy or the recovery process. It's not meant to encompass those non-medical massages, but I can say that these exemptions are pretty standard.
And just to clarify, the medical massage issues, they still require a licensed masseuse, just not by us. I mean, we're not doing the licensing anymore, but even if it's a doctor saying we're doing a medical massage, it has to be a licensed practitioner that's doing the massage. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman. If you notice A1A, so 507-110A1A says massage therapists are required to be certified by CAMTech. That is the state body that certifies massage therapists. And so, yes, they would need to be certified by the state.
And from what I've seen, most physical therapists have a different type of license, even if they're doing massage as part of physical therapy, and I think that's part of the area that you're talking about here.
All
I
right, so,
think because they're licensed separately by the state also.
okay, so I guess unwittingly maybe, but I'm going to go ahead and own it now. I will bring the motion to close the public hearing and present this ordinance to the City Council as presented, with the exception of the additional enforcement measure that I requested.
I'll second that.
Okay, I will call the question. Okay, thank you. And again, thank you for your comments. Okay, so that item number 4, if I'm counting right?
Yes, item 4 is a zoning code amendment. Would amend facility regulations, and Ron Santos has a presentation and some additional graphics to show you this evening.
Good evening, Chairman Brower, members of the Planning Commission. This amendment to the city's wireless ordinance was initiated last year at the request of the City Council. Pursuant to applicable provisions of the municipal code, the Commission is tasked this evening with reviewing the draft amendment, receiving public comment, identifying any desired revisions, and forwarding a recommendation to the City Council. The draft ordinance incorporates feedback received from the Planning Commission over the course of 3 workshops, which I'm sure you recall, as well as input from representatives of various wireless communication service providers. The draft was also prepared in coordination with the City Attorney's Office, which was instrumental in assisting us reconcile state and federal laws. As discussed in the staff report, the draft amendment represents a substantial overhaul to the city's current ordinance, which I'll now summarize for the Commission. Perhaps most significant change proposed is the incorporation of 7 new facility classifications in replacement of the major and minor classifications in the current ordinance. The intent of the classification system is to provide for the wide variation in facilities designs that may be proposed from time to time, and to establish processes and standards appropriate to each classification. If I can direct the Commission's attention to Table 1 in the staff report, which is on page 152 of the agenda packet, I'd like to show a presentation of show examples, photos that is, of each type of facility so that the Commission could get a better sense of the proposed classifications. All but one of the two examples that I will show you are existing facilities in Lake Forest. So this first slide is showing examples of Class 1 facilities, which we have termed stealth in the draft ordinance. By definition, these would be facilities that are fully concealed and architecturally integrated with another primary structure. Under the draft ordinance, Class 1 facilities would be subject to an administrative site development permit. This next slide shows Class 2 facilities, which, like Class 1, are also affixed to an existing proposed structure, but instead of being fully concealed, the antennas are camouflaged such that they would be visible to varying degrees. These facilities would be subject to Planning Commission review and approval of a use permit. Next up is Class 3, which are freestanding facilities constructed for the sole or primary purpose of supporting wireless communication antennas. Class 3 facilities would require approval of a use permit by the Planning Commission. Class 4 facilities are facilities installed in the public right-of-way. Typically, these would consist of antennas affixed to a replacement light pole. Class 4 facilities would be subject to administrative approval, but would also require a license agreement approved by the City Council. Staff is recommending a change to the standards for Class 4 facilities from that proposed in the draft ordinance in your packets. It was pointed out to us by our friends at AT&T that the requirement to match the height of existing light poles would preclude installation of short antennas at the top of a standard height light pole, similar to the facilities depicted in the slide. So what's circled there at the top of the pole would be the antenna that's exceeding the height of a standard height light pole. These are, by the way, examples of facilities which were already approved by the Planning Commission. Draft ordinance instead allow for extensions above the standard light pole height up to 4 feet. The 4 feet would accommodate both of the examples shown in the slide and all of the right-of-way facilities that the city has approved to date. An amended version of the corresponding provision of the draft ordinance was placed on the dais earlier for your consideration. This is the white page with the yellow highlighted revision. Additionally, there is a copy of an email that we received from AT&T with 2 additional suggestions for amendments to the. Next is Class 5, which are temporary facilities. A temporary facility might be proposed in rare cases where, for example, an existing permanent facility is placed out of service as a result of, let's say, a vehicle collision while it's being rebuilt to accommodate replacement of the structure, possibly for new technology going onto the pole. Class 5 facilities would be subject to administrative approval in non-residential zones and Planning Commission approval in residential zones. Class 6 facilities are facilities affixed to an existing structure, such as a utility structure, I should say, such as an SCE tower or water tank, as in the examples in the slide. Class 6 facilities would be subject to an administrative approval. And lastly, Class 7 facilities are facilities preemptively regulated by federal law, which permits only an administrative, non-discretionary review by the city. Class 7 facilities would be facilities co-located with existing facilities in such a manner that they do not represent a substantial change to the design of the original facility. Substantial change, that is, as that term is defined and as indicated in the attachment to your staff report. It should be noted that the law on which the Class 7 facilities provisions are based is currently pending a legal challenge, and there is at least some potential that some or all of these regulations could be invalidated. For that reason, in part, the draft ordinance simply references the federal law rather than incorporating its full text. So any changes that happen at the federal level, we would not need to amend our ordinance. Other significant changes to the current ordinance include regulations for certain types of co-location projects that are based on recently enacted state law, revisions that would permit a wider array of compatible facilities in and near residential zones, and the elimination of the requirement to perform full environmental review for every major facility. That concludes the staff presentation on this item, but I'd be happy to provide further details regarding any of the provisions of the draft ordinance or to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Anybody have questions for staff to start? Go ahead.
Hi, Ron. On Class 3, so it says that the height limit is 35 and may request additional height per, can you expand on that?
So the draft ordinance provides a 35-foot height limit, which is essentially the by right height. Keeping in mind, of course, that the entire...
What height?
The by right height, meaning the height that is allowed by right in the code.
Okay.
Keeping in mind that it would require a use permit, so the entire facility would be subject to planning commission review.
Okay.
Now, if the applicant is proposing additional height above the 35 feet, then the commission would have the authority to approve whatever height it deems appropriate based on the findings that the draft ordinance provides for, which are fairly simple findings that where the commission deems that additional height appropriate based on the context and the...
So if there's a fire station and it's higher than the 35 and we want to go 50, then it might be something that we would approve. So then my question would be that if we then approve 50, does that setback from the residential go to 50 or does it stay at 35?
Under the current ordinance, it's a 1-to-1 setback setback to height requirement. So you're correct. If the commission approved a 50-foot height, then the setback would also be 50, the minimum setback.
So would that be something that we would have to do, or because there could, based on the way it's written today, or if when it comes before us, is there a way that if it's 50 that we stick with the 35? There's just no way that we could then allow a 35-foot setback as opposed to a 50? Would we have to rewrite it to allow that ability of a carrier to not be so far from residential?
Yes. The other possible way would be if the commission were inclined to grant a variance and all the findings for a variance were you could make all the findings for a variance. But otherwise, that would...
Which is kind of a hard way to go.
Yes, but this setback requirement would be similar to any setback requirement that we apply to any structure that might be proposed in the city. And any building, at least that I can think of, would have some setback requirement, a new home, a new commercial building. And so as those projects come before the commission, they would be subject to those setbacks unless the commission granted a variance. There aren't other provisions of the code that give the commission the authority to grant exceptions to setbacks.
But could we say that the setbacks are 35 feet, the maximum of 35 feet?
Absolutely. So the draft ordinance is on the table for the commission to offer whatever recommendation.
Do you see a problem with reducing that in the case that we have some very, very high tower that we allow to go through, that we then limit the residential setback? Is that a problem?
Well, not on the face of it. I could say, for example, that when it comes to setbacks and generally, there's no magic number to it. When, let's say, we require a 15-foot setback for a house, that 15-foot isn't established in a lab, you know, in terms of some kind of science that says 15-foot is the exact number. It could just as well have been 14 or 12 or 16, right? But part of the reason for the purpose of the setback is to allow sort of equal treatment where, you know, everybody's subject to the same regulations under the same zone or the same criteria. So the only issue that the commission might deal with is that if you waive the setback requirement, then the commission would be determining the setback on a case-by-case basis, and it may be difficult to establish some parameters that you're comfortable with from one project to the next.
If I could add on that, the purpose of the setback was really to protect the residential component. So the setback is to residential only, and so the concept behind this is the compatibility between the two things. A 35-foot pole separated from residential, the structure by 35 feet, creates this separation. So if we increase the height of the pole to 50 feet or 60 feet and not move the pole further away, then we have the possibility of putting very large facilities close to residential. So this is, you know, really designed to give some protection to the residential areas. In our former code, it was very difficult to even get into a residential area. I think we had a 200-foot separation. So this is requiring a separation to residential based on the height of it is there to protect the residents.
If I could piggyback on this conversation, because it fits right in with questions I had already written down for myself. The first thing I thought when I saw the 1-to-1 ratio was that, okay, it's so that if the pole falls over, it's not going to hit the house. You know, it's kind of logical, makes sense, but then I started to kind of dig in my head, and I didn't have a chance to dig into other areas of our ordinance because I was focusing on this. But does anybody know, staff-wise, what is the minimum required setback for a residential home from the street?
Commissioner, Chairman, it depends on the zone. Typically, it's 10 feet in most of the residential. In some cases, it's up to 20 feet, but I don't believe we have any front setback requirements greater than 20.
Okay, and the reason I ask is if I've got a light pole that's 35 feet by right in the public right-of-way, and it falls over, it's going to hit almost every house that it's in front of if it falls that direction. So I don't think it's a good idea for us to create a burden on an industry that we all need as much as we do. We all rely on as much as we do, that's any different than the burden we've created on other utilities. And so, and I don't mean that as a slight to anybody who, this is brilliantly drafted, this is a ton of work. This one area really stands out to me is if a light pole is going to be allowed to be long enough to fall in the front yard and knock this guy's front window in, how is this any different?
Chairman Brower, if I could clarify, the code actually exempts the right-of-way facilities from that 1-to-1 setback requirement. So in the case of a light pole on a residential street, there's no setback requirement. The light pole would be where the light poles typically are, which is in the parkway or sidewalk adjacent. It's the other facilities that are subject to say the freestanding monopine in a parking lot that requires the 1-to-1 setback.
And if I could also chime in on this one, these are freestanding facilities. A light pole has a certain circumference, and you know it's a common something that we'd see in the environment. The freestanding facility could be a monopalm, it could be a cypress, it could be an obelisk, it could have some significant girth and structure to it. So that's part of the reason. It would be very noticeable if it was even taller than 35 feet. So we can't really control the size, the width, the circumference of that freestanding facility.
But it has to go through us for approval, so we don't have to approve it, right?
Chairman Brower, just to follow up on what I was saying before about the setback helping to guide the commission. It's not unusual for the commission sometimes to turn to us and say, staff, can we get some guidance on what the appropriate, let's say, setback would be? So if we did not have a setback standard, then the commission might be in a position where you would look to us and say, well, what do you think, staff? Well, what setback should this be? And so in addition to, of course, the obvious point that Ms. Ackerman made about the purpose of protecting the adjacent residential property from the impact of the facility, the setback would also provide guidance to the commission. The commission could require a greater setback, for example, if they came across a facility that they thought could be more impactful than might otherwise be the case to a certain residence because of the design of that facility.
Okay. And I certainly understand that. And actually, I'm a big fan of clearly defined ordinances so that, part of the thing we're trying to do here is clean it up so that providers, when they're coming in, know what they have to deal with. And so it's hard to do that if we have too many variables. I just was not sure that was one that I agreed with. So I'm still not sure. But I see the pros and cons on both sides of that. So at the moment, I don't think we've ever gotten beyond questions for staff. So unless
I have one more question for staff, sorry. Okay, so Ron, so under Class 6, Class 4, specifically, we're looking at pole lights, and you say similar public poles. Would that include like an Edison pole?
What the city has been doing with the right-of-way facilities that have been installed to date is, so let me step back. All of the light poles in the city are Edison-owned poles. But when a wireless company comes in and proposes to establish a wireless facility on a pole, they remove the Edison pole, install a new pole that's designed and engineered to support the additional weight of the antennas, I suppose, in part to your point about the potential for the pole falling down.
Wait, let me clarify that. It says that it's a signal pole or a light standard or other similar apparatus. It doesn't specifically say the Edison poles. Do you intend that to be in Class 4?
Well, if they became a wireless facility, it would not be an Edison pole. At the point that it transfers from just a regular light pole to a light pole with an antenna on it, then it would no longer be an Edison pole, it would be a city-owned pole. But a wireless facility could also be potentially installed, say, on a traffic signal, for example, or some other utility apparatus in the right-of-way.
Which is what you're addressing here.
Yes.
So why don't we include electricity poles in this?
We could specifically name that. I think that
other utilities.
Yeah, the statement of the light standard or other similar apparatus, that gives us some room to interpret that in terms of what constitutes other apparatus, and typically an electricity pole would fall under that. But we can certainly add specifically an electricity pole.
Utility poles.
Yeah, the tricky thing about that, again, is that the way we've been permitting these now is we're not using SCE-owned facilities, we're using city-owned facilities, city-owned poles. We're replacing the SCE pole with the city-owned pole. And as part of that, the city enters into a lease agreement with the wireless service provider, and the city gets revenue associated with that. And it also gives us additional controls through the lease agreement over what can and can't be on the pole, the equipment, the rates of rent. Those are all negotiated with the city council ultimately and approved by the city council.
So if AT&T comes and talks to Edison to put something on an Edison pole, the city's going to change it to a city pole, and the city gets the lease as opposed to Edison getting the lease.
Well, there may be some impracticalities to that, because I'm not sure that the city could own an electric pole that is connected with overhead wires, for example, with other SCE poles. Do you follow me on that?
I do, and I wonder if that's why it's not included in here. But maybe those are great poles to put our wireless.
Well, it's not exclusive either. That is, the city could interpret the other apparatus to include that if it were deemed feasible, everything else considered. So if we could negotiate with SCE to replace their pole with the city-owned electric pole, and that would still work with the network, the electricity network, and the council was in agreement with owning the pole and entering into a lease agreement, then...
Why do we have to own the pole? Why can't we just put a wireless antenna on an Edison pole?
Good question. The reason the city opts to own the pole is because that allows us to lease the use of the pole to the wireless service provider. And what comes with that, as I mentioned, is revenue for the city, because the lease is generating the service provider would pay the city to lease the pole. And the lease agreement, as I mentioned, includes other provisions that protect the city. So, for example, you'll notice in the ordinance that we require that a light pole be designed to allow a banner to be hung on it. So if we wanted to have some city event advertised, sports park grand opening, and string a banner to it, because we own the pole, we could do that. If SCE owned the pole, we could not require that a banner be strung from their pole.
Well, we don't ever put banners on electrical poles, do we?
No, we don't, but keep in mind that the provision of the code is intended for, it's not that specific to list every possible facility in the right-of-way that could be converted for use as an entitlement. And so...
I just am a little concerned that, especially since it's administrative, that approval, that we're...
No, I don't disagree with you for the moment.
Thank you.
I would like to actually move things forward, because I'm guessing we have speakers.
Commissioner Brown, just one last point.
Absolutely.
Also, I'm not sure that we would have the authority to say that a wireless facility could be installed on a pole that's owned by SCE. If we own the pole, if the city owns a pole, then we can certainly say you can put antennas on it. But if we don't own the pole, we couldn't stipulate in our code that it's allowed, at least not without the consent of SCE or whoever does own the pole.
Right. Well, I agree with you, but I would say that I personally don't see any reason that we can't clarify the rules to the point where if somebody wants to put a cell structure on top of a pole, regardless of who owns it, that as long as it meets these requirements, and included in those requirements is that the owner of the pole is on board, you can't go out and...
And maybe we split the rent.
Well, no, I don't think even there, I don't think we can, but that's another argument to be had, I think, later tonight, probably. But,
yeah. Perhaps if we could listen to the speakers, and one of the options the commission has is to have us go back and do some additional research, because obviously we don't have, we're all kind of speculating about this. We've been working with an attorney in BBK's Sacramento office who's very much an expert in this field. So that's always an option, too, because we'd really like to make sure we understand your concerns and give you the correct answers. And we've been working on the ordinance for a while, so if we need more information, we'd be happy to come back, too. So
right.
we want to hear from the speakers and decide where to go from there.
I agree, and that's actually where I was headed. So I think unless there's any questions specific to the format, I'd like to go ahead and have Peggy call our first speaker. I would ask that, as with everybody, just please state your name and city of residence for the record, and we'll go.
Leslie Daigle. Hope I didn't kill your last name.
Here. Good evening, Chair Brar, Vice Chair Fuentes, Commissioners. My name is Leslie Daigle. I represent Verizon Wireless, our Western headquarters are located on Sand Canyon, Irvine, California. We're here to provide the latest and greatest technology to the residents and businesses and visitors of Lake Forest, and do so in a manner that minimizes impacts. We really appreciate all the hard work of the staff on this. Thank you. And we agree with much of the ordinance. We do have a number of concerns that we'd like to raise with the Commission. So you're requiring a license agreement for use of the city-owned street lights, which will comply with 7901, where rent is permitted on city-owned property. The poles your property, rent is permitted. However, across the region, it's widely implemented that we go on SCE poles or other poles, and there's actually an organization, JPA, Joint Pole Association, where we secure rights and people get paid and you pay for maintenance. It's a very well thought out arrangement in terms of poles. So one of the issues that our attorneys actually saw was they wanted to clarify that replacement streetlight facilities, that those will be allowed as well. So we want the ability to go on to Edison as well. It's not explicitly stated, and so we would seek clarification on that. We join with AT&T, and we thank you for your acceptance of the concept that it can go a little bit above the height in the right-of-way, because we do attach these radome antennas. So I wanted to talk about that. Now, there was the issue of the height limit, and a good idea, a good place to go when you're near residential is a fire station, right? That's a great example. You're going to church steeple. So when we're going near residential, we're usually going to be within something near residential, which are those types of facilities. And for us to have the problem with a 1-for-1 ratio requirement is 50 feet, which is more inclined to what we're going to go than 30 feet, then you're talking about pretty far. And I don't know how your subdivisions are in Lake Forest, but that's a lot of burden to go that far. And so our suggestion would be more of an across-the-board setback of 30 to 35 feet. I would discourage variances. I happen to live in a coastal community, and I can tell you variances are a huge liability for a city. You get into things like preferences for people, you get into hardships, and the findings have to do with a peculiar physical characteristic of the property. So you have to demonstrate that somehow this property is irregularly shaped, or there's a slope, or these types of things. So we would discourage variance as a tool for exception, and we would what we're seeking is a more uniform height, 30 foot, and that's a uniform buffer across the board from residential, which is more significant than typical 10-foot side yard setback. So it's more burdensome for us, but we're concerned about that 1-to-1 ratio because of the heights and how that would play out in terms of the widths and lengths of your property. So those would be our three issues. We are looking for clarification. Our attorneys raise these things because we don't want to get into interpretations down the line. We want to be clear up front that it does include Edison light poles or light poles. And then secondly, we discussed the height issue and our suggestion on that. So thank you for your time and your service. I appreciate it.
And actually, if you could stay for just a moment.
Oh, sure.
I have a question. I'd like to get some quick clarification on something you said.
Yeah.
I was under the impression that on the setback requirement for residential, that was dealing with freestanding, and it sounds more like what you're talking about with church steeples, firehouses, et cetera, that we're looking more at stealth on those particular facilities. And so I'm curious, if we do a 50 or even a 65-foot false chimney attached to a building, that's a Class 1 facility, not a freestanding. Is the residential setback still required?
You're correct, Chairman Brower. The 1-to-1 setback requirement in the current draft would apply to freestanding facilities, not to facilities affixed to a building or other existing or proposed structure.
So there is a potential out, at least, that if you want to go into an area as a developer or as a wireless provider that maybe it looks ideal, but for the setback, if you can find a way to do it without it being freestanding, then you're fine.
That's correct. The freestanding facilities, as we define them in the code, are facilities that are designed and built for the sole purpose of a wireless facility. And so they have a greater potential to impact the residential area than something that's, say, a stealth facility that's an existing commercial building and you're putting buildings on the roof behind the parapet wall.
All right, and so...
I don't want to interrupt the chair. Go ahead.
No, I mean, that was my main question at this point. I know we have other speakers, right? We don't. Okay, so I'll go ahead and...
So one clarification, though, so let's talk about, if that, I appreciate your clarification. For example, a eucalyptus, and that would be subject, and we're going to, if we do a tree, it's going to be 50, 60 feet high, so then we'd have to go 60 feet either setback. And as, for some context, we're putting one in Irvine just for the Irvine company. They have very high aesthetic standards. And the other trees that we're doing, special pine trees. So, trees are something that we do, and it would just be very burdensome to look for a site that we have to put it in a place that it's going to be 60 feet here and 60 feet there. So,
and just out of curiosity, since you're up here and you mentioned Irvine, rather than making me ask Ron, and he may or may not know off the top of his head, but what are the setback requirements in Irvine as an example?
Well, first of all, most of it has to do with the setbacks of the property, and the way that your ordinance is structured is very similar to Irvine. It's very cutting edge in that what you're doing is it by facility type. So you're recognizing that it's aesthetics, and if you're doing something that's pretty stealth, then that's going to be administered. If you're doing something that has a greater perceived visual impact, then that's going to require discretionary review. So your overall setup is good. That's why we support it. In Irvine, certainly the concern is with setbacks. There's no firm one. They have certain suggested distances. They call it a distance there. But I'm not aware of anything with this. And we're heavily partnering with the Irvine company because, as you may know, the northern sphere is being built out, those northern areas, and what we're trying to do is get ahead of the curve, and as these entry monuments are being built and as these communities go in to put in the trees, the ukes and the pines and the clock towers and all that, and those are, they're adjacent to communities, and folks these days, when they go to move, they look at their phone and see if it's going to work to buy a new home.
Right. Okay. Thank you. It looked like we had somebody else that was interested in speaking. If you have it ready, your card over this way. You already have it, okay. So it's Stephen Garcia, and I'll pass this down. Thank you, sir. If you could state your name and city of residence for the record.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the Commission, staff. Stephen Garcia with Crown Castle. Our office is at 300 Spectrum Center Drive, Irvine, California. I was here just 2 weeks ago working with staff, the Commission, and City Council in getting our license agreement for 7 Class 4 facilities adopted and approved. And so I wanted to kind of add some clarity to the Class 4 questions that were raised by staff, the Commission, as well as our friends at AT&T and Verizon. Just real quickly, we agree with AT&T in that I think the intent was to match what's been approved by you, in that the proposed replacement streetlight is an additional 5 feet higher than the existing streetlight poles. So, for example, the facilities that we replaced were 30 feet existing, and then when we added our canister antenna, the overall height was 35 feet. So if I may add some clarity to that, we would ask that it be, that would match the approved heights for those 7 facilities, and that would be 35 feet. There's a bit of confusion about transmission facilities or facilities owned by Edison. So we, like our friends at Verizon, would like to maintain wood utility poles that are currently owned by the Joint Pole Committee and/or Southern California Edison, that those be available to us independent of any license agreement. But what we don't find is that we typically don't see wood utility poles and streetlights in the same common public rights-of-way. So when we talk about streetlight facilities, we're talking about existing Edison carrier solution poles that have been replaced or decommissioned in partnership with the city. As soon as those poles are replaced, then they become assets of the city, and that allows the attachments that you've seen as a Class 4. So we don't see that a major conflict. We just believe there's a misunderstanding about transmission versus streetlights. And that's all I have.
So if I could, using the language that you brought in, because I think it helps, on the transmission poles.
Those would be wood utility poles, steel utility poles, and they're not streetlights.
Right, but the ones that are running power lines.
Correct.
Are those poles still feasible for your work?
They may be feasible for attachments, but they wouldn't be considered a Class 4, in our opinion.
Okay. I guess for the sake of as much information as possible when we go into trying to hash this out, could you explain why you think they're not Class 4, and if not, what would they be?
Well, I guess my focus today was Class 4, which is public rights-of-way, and those facilities related to street light poles. So again, the confusion is becoming, because we're talking about Edison or poles, and we're really strictly focused on streetlight poles.
Right. I guess based on my reading of it, what I would understand Class 4 to be, and maybe this is something we do need to clarify based on what I've heard from Verizon, read from AT&T, and I'm now hearing from you, is that I think that they would still be a Class 4 based on the fact that they are in the public right-of-way.
Yeah.
But we would need to add additional language to clarify the difference between city-owned light poles versus other entity-owned transmission poles.
Yeah, and they wouldn't be converted through a licensing process
Right.
to a city-owned asset.
Right.
Because those are transmission facilities. They're not something that the city could own.
Right.
The city certainly can decommission a streetlight, not a transmission pole, but they can decommission a streetlight as part of your LS1. So.
Right. And so I guess, but that clarification would accomplish us being able to keep our classifications, but also satisfy the confusion issues of, hey, can I go put something on this pole? Because we can still, even though we don't own it, we're not collecting rent from it, and based on what you've said, and I haven't researched the law in enough detail to know if you're right or not, I'm going to trust your expertise for the moment, that we can't own it. So in other words, if we're precluded from the city owning the transmission poles, then we need to have some sort of language that says, okay, you can have these facilities on top of these ones that we don't own. Here's the requirements.
Yes.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
So, okay, thank you. Any additional requests to speak?
Good evening, Planning Commission, Chair Brower. My name is Dan Bozenelik. I represent AT&T. Our nearest office is in Tustin, here in California. And I just wanted to reiterate, we've handed in some writings specifically to this Class 4 issue. Leslie Daigle also spoke, and Steve as well. And we agree the same thing. The replacement of a streetlight, for the most part, our ideal installation is to go above the existing height, right, so that we go up with that radome. I know that Crown Castle requests 5 feet. Generally, 5 feet works, but in some cases, if we're doing a macro site, we need 6.5 feet. So I don't know if 35 feet is actually a great number. So maybe we can be a little more flexible. And then also speaking toward the wood pole right-of-way sites. We do use those, and I do believe the Class 4 classification is applicable. As it is, I don't really see an issue. There are instances where we have a wood pole with a streetlight mounted on it, right? So, but we wouldn't be replacing that. So I don't know if there would be some way to clarify that if it's needed, just specifically for right-of-way sites. But other than that, the setback issue that Verizon brought up as well is something that we have a concern about. Is, you know, if we have to go 50 feet or 60 feet from a property line, the width of that property might only be 100 feet, right? So we're stuck to place something right in the middle of that property. The property owner may want us there, the residents may want us there, but your code won't allow us to physically place anything there. So we don't want to get stuck having to try to fend for a variance if there's a way to get out of that in the beginning. Clarify that. That's all I had. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your comments. Okay, I'm going to ask one more time. There's one person left in the room who hasn't spoken, so just in case, is there anybody else who'd like to speak on this issue? All right, seeing none, I will bring it back up to us to continue discussion. Is there anybody who would like to start?
Just listening and to the conversation and what was just said, we've got a 4 foot, a 5 foot, and now a 6.5 height variance being proposed to go above our 30 foot or whatever it is, the street lights. You know, my thought process is because we have what was on our dais here, that the height was not to exceed more than 4 feet, and maybe in just the interest of not having to come back and deal with this, and again, I think maybe we should just take the tallest of those and consider not 4 feet, but 6.5 feet, so we don't have to come back and be having requests for variances from that. Let's see if we can minimize the impact. I can't see 2.5 feet making a big difference when we're talking about this myself.
Now, especially when you're talking about 30 feet in the air, it's that 2 foot difference is almost non-negligible, or is almost negligible visually. So I'm a little tongue-tied tonight, but yes, sir.
Chairman Brower, just a point of clarification that the draft ordinance provides for additional height above whatever standard that would be adopted that wouldn't require variance. It would be at the Commission's discretion based on the finding that's provided for. So the distinction between a variance for that additional height as opposed to the Commission approving that as part of the use permit.
Hey, just a question, if we approve the higher level, does that make the application a more streamlined method for the applicant, or
yes,
something that could be done over the desk as opposed to having to come before us?
Correct.
Okay, then I'll stay with my original comment. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
I had a couple of questions. One of the things I've noticed when I drive down Big Parkway going to the freeway, there's a cell site that sits there, I think, just pretty close to the railroad overpass. It's about the ugliest thing I think I've ever seen. It's got wires hanging off all over it. It looks like it was put up by a group of high school kids. And you made comments in there about, stuff being in cable trays. Well, part of that stuff is in a cable tray, but there's still wires hanging down off the bottom of the antennas. They're looped. It looks like an amateur did it. That's the type of thing I guess I'm kind of concerned about, that we don't have any of that in Lake Forest. I just don't think it looks good. It doesn't look like it's finished or done. I don't know who that site belongs to, but to me, I'm surprised the city of Irvine let it be there. But I just want to make sure we don't have anything like that happening here, and I'm not sure that completely goes addressed in our ordinance. Now, you could have cables in the cable tray, and you could still have wires dangling off the bottom of the antenna and have it be. In fact, this site is so funky that it looks like they put cable ties around the mast and they tied the cable all the way down. I mean, it really not attractive at all. So I do have an issue with things like that. I've also noticed now driving out Irvine Boulevard, I'm seeing solar panel powered, looked like to be microcell sites. I'm not exactly sure what they are. I'm not sure. We don't have anything mentioned that I could find in this draft statement that talks about solar-powered microcell sites. I think that's something we probably should add to make sure we deal with that, because I'm sure there are places where they're not going to immediately have power, where they'd like to install a site, so I think we should do that. I think that the issue of stuff that goes on utility poles, I think is kind of interesting, because I've never seen any of them that really look good. And part of the problem with the ones on utility poles is quite often they have microwave dishes on them. And there's nothing in here that I can see in this draft situation that talks about what happens if they have to add a microwave link to the cell site. Now, some of them look good, some of them don't. And I think we need to have some type of guideline about what we do with microwave antennas that are attached to a cell site. I don't have a problem with the 6.5, antennas on top of street lights. I'm a little more concerned about what we do with things that are in residential areas, and we haven't talked a lot about that. I'm presuming that most of the stuff that you're talking about, you as the carriers that have to do with residential, are probably more like microcell sites. I guess I'd like to have at least one of you address that for us and tell us what you're planning to do with that. Because I think that that's part of, based on our last discussion in 2014, I think one of the things we talked about was we expected more and more activity within residential areas because of the coverage issue.
That's a very timely issue as to the residential. So, for example, let's go back to Irvine, Great Park, where they're building some residential, and one of the developers wants to propose what's called a DAS, or distributed antenna system. And what that means is you have a site every 500 feet, and you have a pole with an antenna, so it's very compact. You have it one every 500 feet. It's a tool in the garage, but it's not necessarily the best solution in residential. And I'll tell you why. Verizon's doing one of those networks in San Francisco. It's 300 nodes. It's appropriate because it's in North Beach, and you got very high, very dense residential, so the capacity makes sense. Of the 300 sites, 100 are on appeal. So believe it or not, residents oppose those. So it's not a silver bullet doing those tiny sites. So if you could have a macro site, so let's say you could have at your fire station something to cover a half mile, that makes more sense, because you have a macro site, the big site that you have versus smaller sites. So it's a tool in the toolbox, but it's not a silver bullet solution by any means. The poles, though, just to clarify, we would be paying the city rent when we go on their poles. When we're on the SCE, we wouldn't be paying the city rent, but if we were to use your right-of-way, for example, cabinets, then it would be appropriate for the city to charge us rent. So there are opportunities to get rent when we put the antenna on the SCE pole, depending on what happens with the cabinet. So it's not completely excluded. We're not, so I wanted to make that point. And I'll take a look at your site there. I don't know whose site that is with the cable. We certainly don't. It's in our interest to be proactive and to make things look good. So I'll get the address from staff, and I don't know who it belongs to.
I don't either. I know I drive by it and I look at it and I think this is appropriate.
Sure.
Lake Forest and Irvine, it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, I agree.
Because some of the others actually look pretty good. They're just small, they're fairly discreet.
Right.
They're hidden up in the tower where they're not quite so visible. And that's fine, but some of this other stuff, I said, looks like amateurs did it.
But it's a real challenge with the residential, customers want fast, business wants up and down, which is uploads and downloads, and there's such a demand for speed. And one of the things that you can anticipate is we're going to be doing a lot of modifications, swapping out antennas, and this is to add frequencies and to add capacity. And to the extent that we can modify our existing site, you're going to need less new sites. Which is obviously less capital investment, less leases. So we're interested too in modifying and beefing up our current sites, but that will entail coming into your counter and asking to swap out antennas. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, if you could stay, I'm going to shift gears, but I'm going to ask another question of the carriers. As it regards to the 1-to-1 ratio on the height restrictions, I used to work as in-house counsel for a billboard company.
Oh, sure.
And there are a lot of billboards that are up in L.A., at least, literally over the top of residential. They're mounted on a pole that's at a gas station, but they stick out over an apartment building or over a house. Not one I would want to live in, but and thankfully I've never seen you guys do anything quite that extreme. But by that same token, the way they get around, the ones that are legal anyway, that's a different argument. But the ones that are legal and are built that way with permits, they have to come in with findings as to certain structural requirements. The poles are sank a certain depth and they're built a certain way, and so there's engineering reports that are all part of that process of making sure that it's going to be safe for the buildings around it. And I'm curious what the burden would be from your perspective to say, we're going to go with this 35-foot height requirement. You have a process where if you need to go higher, we can approve that. And simply saying, if you're going to go higher than 35 feet, at the 35 feet, it's a 1-to-1 setback. If you're going to go higher than 35 feet because you need to, can you show that you can do so in a way that is not any more of an impact? And from a safety standpoint, from a visual standpoint, all the different things that tie in. If we had language in here that allowed for that process, would that be more burden than it's worth, or would that be helpful?
That would certainly be more helpful than where it is. In terms of structural, we go through building and safety, and they go through all the calcs, and we have people with stamps that get behind it. So, we're gonna engineer it and construct it in a safe manner. I don't think falling over is going to happen. We're somewhat different from billboards in that billboards want to be seen, right? They want to have lights and those types of things. We're not really aiming to be seen and to be obtrusive. We're trying to stealth and conceal it. We need the height for our network to function. Right. So it's a little different motivation, and to the extent that we're able to stealth it, then we're going to go in that direction.
Right. So if, for example, it's a tree, it needs to be 50 feet high for as a example. My concern on the height versus setback aesthetically is no different than it would be if there was a real tree there that was 50 or 60 feet high. And so for me, at least, it would just be a question of, can you show me that it's safe?
Sure, yeah, we can certainly meet that burden, and if you want to specify that in your code, we would certainly be supportive of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have additional discussions for tonight? So before we, I guess what I'm going to ask is, do we have a consensus on, do we want to try to move forward with making a few tweaks and sending it on, or do we want to ask them to make the tweaks and come back because of the extent of the tweaks?
Well, staff understand what we've been talking about? Could you just...
Yes, we have taken detailed notes, and we can also work with the carriers and exchange more ideas and look at some other ordinances, and that would allow us to more comprehensively address this, because we really have some questions very specific in different areas, and I think we could come back with a solution that's comprehensive for you.
I'm just making sure, I'm trying to balance the desire to move this process forward with the desire to make sure we get it right. And so that's kind of where we're at. It sounds like it might make sense to have you go ahead and incorporate those changes, but I'd like to do it as quickly as is feasible.
Yes, we've been working with the carriers certainly throughout the whole process. So to agree upon a workable solution here would be a good conclusion.
Okay. I just know that we're now Councilmember Hamilton, kind of started kicking the can on this process 2.5 years ago, and then after getting elected to council was able to get it actually moving to the extent that it is, and I would hate to see it take 2 more years because we're trying to clean up a couple of loose ends. And so I just want to make sure that we can have it brought back without having to continue to kick it down the road. So I guess I'm open to a motion, or I'll bring one. You tell me. Does anybody want to bring it? Okay, I'm going to go
I'll make the motion that we return this back to the staff and then rework it based on the public input that we got tonight and based on the questions that I think that the commission has. I think that if we spend another month on this, it's not going to make that much difference in the scheme of things. So I'd make a motion that we return this back to staff for further consideration.
a second. All right. So unless somebody else wants to say something, we'll vote. All right, so that concludes that. I would just ask, that we do it as quickly as is feasible. Since we're only meeting once a month now, I'd hate to have it get dragged on for another year as a result. So, all right. So anyway, let me get my agenda back out here. I believe that brings us to director's comments.
I have just a few comments this evening, and we will return that ordinance. We'd like to move it along as well, so we'll get that back. I'm confident we can come up with something that addresses the concerns. A couple things. Carrie Ty, our principal planner, spoke to the commission earlier before the meeting started, and as you now know, Carrie's going to the city of Long Beach with a fabulous job opportunity, and we wish her well. And her last day is, I believe, October 22nd. Also on October 22nd, it's the Planning Officials Forum at the Nixon Library. Several of the commissioners are scheduled to attend that event. It should be a great event and a chance to get a lot of new information. Also on your agenda in November, we have a new item. It's going to be a year in review, and a chance for the commission to talk about the accomplishments over the past year, what they feel are the best accomplishments that they'd like to highlight for the city council. The commission will have the opportunity to talk about that subject, the year in review, as well as talk amongst yourselves about what kind of information from the council could be helpful for you in your job. And then we will package that into a report, and the chairman of the Planning Commission will attend a city council meeting in January. So this is a new process that the council adopted, and both the Park and Rec Commission and the Planning Commission will be doing this in November and December, and then with the chairs presenting in January. That's it.
So we pick a new chair in December. Okay, so after our director, we move to the city attorney.
No comment.
All right, thank you. So that brings us over to Planning Commission comments. Who would like to start?
I'll start. I'm just really excited to see so many of the carriers come tonight for the wireless discussion. I thought that was just excellent, and I really appreciate their being here and their input. I think that adds another dimension to this that we really needed. So I felt really good about that, and I think this generally was a good night. I think we did a lot of good work tonight. And again, I want to thank the staff so much for all the work that they do. That was a tremendous amount of work that you did on all these projects tonight, and I personally really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the staff for really well done staff reports, well organized, all the loose ends pulled together. Thank you very much. And also, I'm still learning, so that's about all I've got to say. It's still a learning experience for me.
What's the old saying? When you stop learning, you start dying, something like that. So.
Thank you, staff. Good luck, Carrie. Happy Halloween.
How do you follow that up? I mean, typically a great job by staff, and no other comment.
Okay, so I will echo my colleagues in thanking all of our staff, and especially tonight, Carrie, even though she wasn't on our agenda at all, but for she had 8.5 tremendous years of contribution to the city. And so, and then getting back to people who did directly impact tonight's meeting, Ron and Jennifer both, and I'm sure with Gail and Nikki having their inputs and fingerprints all over it, the quality of what comes to us is incredible. You make our job considerably easier. So I really appreciate that. And then what I would like to add tonight is, as we speak, my second oldest niece is in labor in Louisiana. So on the last little bit of our record tonight, I'm going to say congratulations to Darian Brooke, and let's bring it home a healthy baby. Thank you. So, and I will close out our next 12th?
November 12th.
So I will adjourn tonight's meeting to our next regularly scheduled meeting on November 12th.